welcome you to Training CD 74. From the 2005 Young Living Annual Convention, a highly informative lecture by Mark Schroeder on the low glycemic index or sugar levels of Ningxia Wolfberry and the beneficial effects of Ningxia Wolfberry on blood sugar. Mark will be followed by an exciting presentation by Wayne Silverman of the American Botanical Council. Wayne will present the vast array of information available on the youngliving.com website as you click on the American Botanical Council logo. And now here's Steve Bentley, CFO of Young Living, to introduce Mark Schroeder.
At Young Living, we have Chinese scientists, we have rocket scientists, and we have a mad scientist. And it's my privilege to introduce to you now Mark Schroeder, who is our resident mad scientist. Mark has been with Young Living for, I believe, about 8 years, and he's traveled the world with Gary and with Young Living, researching and writing about essential oils and about our products. He's been a marvelous addition to our knowledge base and to what we're able to provide to you. Mark and his wife Connie are also the proud parents of a brand new baby girl, Marcy. So let's welcome Mark Schroeder.
How you doing today, guys? Are you awake? I'm going to talk a little bit today about glycation, and you probably want a definition of that. In simple, it is how the Wolfberry relates to sugar. We're not going to talk about essential sugars, but we're just going to talk about more of the glycemic impact of the Wolfberry and how it can benefit people that have issues with diabetes or vision problems. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is wolfberries and how they relate to the eyes. The largest cause of blindness is age-related macular degeneration in people over 55. It's the largest cause of blindness. It occurs as the receptors, the rods and cones in the back of your eye, in the retina, start to slowly burn out. And they say it's attributed to blue light, high-energy blue light over the years. 7.3 million people currently are at high risk of that. There are two forms of age-related macular degeneration, the wet and a dry form. For our purposes, we're just going to call them good for both of them. They're a little bit similar. The wet form involves hemorrhaging behind the retina of the eye. The dry form does not involve the hemorrhaging or the neovascularization, but it is still, and it is more prevalent. They're both of concern. So here's a picture of what a normal person will see. Now, as they get older, you will see that the center of the eye becomes fuzzy. You're starting to lose cones and rods. You're losing the ability to see. As you get older, you will see that the center of your vision slowly deteriorates until eventually you are blind. The only thing you see in the world is through a periphery. How many of you know anybody that has age-related macular degeneration? There's a study done by Norman Krinsky and his colleagues at the Florida International University. In fact, the Florida International University has been conducting a number of very interesting studies on carotenoids and how lutein and zeaxanthin in particular influence the progression of age-related macular degeneration. And also they've actually determined the levels that lutein and zeaxanthin occur inside the macular pigment, inside the eye. The most sensitive part of the eye that is being burned out through age, through light, through sugar, through diabetes, what have you. And you can see one of their papers here. And what they're discussing is how lutein and zeaxanthin in the diet, through dietary consumption, can slow the progression of AMD, or age-related macular degeneration. You look in the eye. If you see the eye, what we're talking about here, and you saw the pictures of how the site goes, we're talking about the macula's right here. That is responsible for this high central acuity vision that you see right there. I don't know if you can see that little spot. That's the macula. And inside of that, there's something called the fovea, which is the center of the macula. Now, you'll see that in foods, there's a number of different carotenoids. The paper that we just saw looked at lutein and zeaxanthin. Those are the bottom two. Lutein and zeaxanthin occur in very high amounts in the macula. I look at lutein and zeaxanthin as ocular sunscreens. They literally screen out damaging free radicals, damaging blue light, and protect a very delicate retinal pigment behind from what they call drusen, the formation of drusen, or the formation of lipofuscin-type granules that slowly lead to blindness over time. So what they've been doing is, in recent studies, this was done by Stuart Richter at the University of Illinois, and what he found was that supplementing the diet with lutein and zeaxanthin was able to reduce the effects or reduce the progression of AMD markedly. So there's a lot of good science behind lutein and zeaxanthin. But we're going to talk a little bit about zeaxanthin in particular, because what they're finding now is that zeaxanthin is far more important than lutein for eye health. And the reason is because in the very center of your eye, the ratios of lutein to zeaxanthin drastically favor zeaxanthin. There's far more zeaxanthin in the center of the eye, or the fovea, where the light-bearing rods and cones are, than there is anywhere else in the human body, or anywhere else in the eye. It's basically 75% zeaxanthin, or its isomer called mesozeaxanthin, in the very center of the eye, and that is what protects the eye from damage. I've seen a lot of lutein supplements. They have very small amounts of zeaxanthin. Now, why take a lutein supplement that is 95% lutein and 5% zeaxanthin when your eye is using the reverse? Your eye is using primarily zeaxanthin and not lutein. And that's the problem. You'll see that in the standard American diet, we probably get 12 to 1 in favor of lutein to zeaxanthin. Most of that's coming from spinach, corn, collard greens, that kind of thing. You can see the outside of the macula, it's actually a 1-to-1 ratio, and the inside of the macula, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So one of the recent papers have been coming out identifying different ratios of lutein and zeaxanthin in different foods. We're obtaining these from separate studies, this data, because the U.S. nutrition base, if you were to go online and look at the government database for food content, where they measure all the different vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients in foods, they lump lutein and zeaxanthin together as one composite because they haven't had the technology in the last 10 years, or there's never been the demand to really break those out separately. But there have been some studies done, and you will see that the highest known source currently of zeaxanthin is red peppers. Egg yolks are very high, and egg yolks is one of the only foods where zeaxanthin and lutein occur in 1-to-1. In most foods, you'll see lutein predominate vastly. So as I started looking at the wolfberry, and I know Dr. Young was very, very interested in how the wolfberry would benefit the eye. So we wanted to look at, well, let's find out what the zeaxanthin levels in the Ningxia wolfberry are in comparison to common foods and very uncommon food. As I say, the highest known current source recorded of zeaxanthin in the diet currently is red peppers. Where do you think the wolfberry fits in on this? Would you be disappointed if I told you it'd be somewhere between red peppers and egg yolk? The Ningxia wolfberry is the highest known recorded source of zeaxanthin in a whole food that exists. Dr. Young and I compiled that data in 2001, and it has gone ignored by everyone. No one knows about it. So it's really old news, but it's new news. You can see here the date of this report, where it was submitted March 20th, 2002. This report is 3 years old. It was done by Eurofin's laboratories, their Alpha Tech division, which specializes in carotenoid analysis, and they derive their standards from Hoffman LaRoche, who has been the pioneer in this, in setting standards. And you can see here, 278 micrograms per gram of zeaxanthin per gram. That's not very much wolfberry. If you were to do it for a common food measure per 100 grams, you'd have to multiply that by 100. So you have about 27 milligrams of zeaxanthin in a half a cup of dried wolfberries. What does that mean therapeutically? Here, there has been some recent papers. This paper was done 2005 at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, where they actually fed human volunteers Ningxia wolfberry and then measured the zeaxanthin levels in their blood. Because what you have here is not just the highest source of zeaxanthin, and a good source of lutein as well, but you have a source of zeaxanthin that's in the form of an ester. And what German researchers found was that this esterified zeaxanthin, also known as zeaxanthin dipalmitate, is far more bioavailable than common isolated zeaxanthin. Once again, this boils down to the whole food obviously being more powerful than the fragmented or isolated nutrients. And you can see here in this Hong Kong University study, the serum zeaxanthin fed to the human volunteers, placebo versus 15 grams of Wolfberry, tripled zeaxanthin levels in the blood. Only 15 grams of Wolfberry. You know how much that is? 3 teaspoons of dried Wolfberry. That's it. You're not talking a lot. You're talking, I know a lot of people that spend a lot of money. How much do you guys spend for, if you take a lutein or zeaxanthin supplement, lutein supplement, how much do you spend on that? I know some people that spend $100 a month plus. And there's no vitamins in the lutein supplements. And here you have a Wolfberry that's got more vitamin C than oranges, more beta-carotene than carrots, more potassium than any known food, more magnesium than almost any known, more calcium than cottage cheese, and you also get all these other benefits. They actually have measured the effect of Lycium barbarum on the retina of diabetic rats where they'll feed them Wolfberry extracts. And you can see that dramatic improvements. 1 gram a day for 2 weeks reduced lipid peroxides in the retina by 20%, increased SOD levels in the retina by 80%, and increased residual ascorbate by 30%. And residual ascorbate, why do they measure that? It's because vitamin C is very important to ocular health and it builds up in the eye, and as it gets burned up or used up through free radical generation in the eye, you get something called residual ascorbate. Now, how much is therapeutically people using? Okay, the average intake in the US and Europe is 2 milligrams a day of lutein and zeaxanthin combined. Not a whole lot we get in our common diet. If you follow USDA dietary guidelines, you'll get 3.8 milligrams, about 4 milligrams a day. But what did the study say? The Seddon study in 1994, which was conducted at the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary in Boston, Massachusetts, and was published, by the way, in JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. The Seddon study found that 6 milligrams a day of lutein and zeaxanthin caused a 57% drop in the risk of age-related macular degeneration. 50%, and this is in JAMA. Look it up, 1994 Seddon. Another study, 1999, more recent, found that lutein and zeaxanthin at the same level, 6 milligrams per day, resulted in a 20% drop in the risk of cataracts. And the type of cataracts I'm talking about is senile cataracts or metabolic cataracts. I'm not talking about, there's about 7 or 8 different types of cataracts, so I'm just talking about the most common ones. I mean, they actually have cataracts relating to lupus. There's a collagen type of cataracts. They have hereditary cataracts. They have even one related to rubella. So we're only going to talk about the metabolically influenced type due to diet or due to age. Another study, the Richter study that you just saw earlier, done at the University of Illinois, used 10 milligrams a day lutein and zeaxanthin to markedly reduce risk or improve vision in AMD. In fact, 43%, I believe is the figure, 43% improvement in central acuity using 10 milligrams a day of lutein and zeaxanthin. So how much lutein do you get in a tablespoon of dried berries or a quarter cup? I think that's 2 tablespoons perhaps. So a quarter cup of dried Ningxia wolfberries gives you 15.1 milligrams of zeaxanthin. Is this not a cost-effective way of giving yourself vision insurance? The results on zeaxanthin are really only for us. I mean, they're new. I mean, Gary and Young Living, they are the pioneers for this. I mean, no one else has this data. And this has been published for the first time in Gary's book. Okay, I want to go into a little bit about free radicals. You've heard about the superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, singlet oxygen, hydroxy radicals. Have you heard a lot about free radicals? We're missing one free radical. Can any of you guess what that is? Look, Gary, we all know, to quote Steve Ross, that you are a stress grenade. But we'll forgive you. Beside Gary, what do you postulate would be the most common free radical in the body and the most damaging free radical and the one that magnifies the effect of every known free radical? SOD is superoxide dismutase. That's a scavenger of free radicals. I'll put up the molecular structure on the board and see if you can identify it. What is this? Someone gave me the right answer. D-glucose. Dextrorotary glucose, also known as sugar, pure sugar. Not even cane sugar, because that's sucrose. That's a disaccharide. Sugar magnifies the effect we need it to live. In excess, it hastens aging faster than any known substance. Blood sugar is your enemy and it's your friend. This study was done by Macula in 1993. He's been doing a lot of work with Anthony Cerami on glycation and aging. How sugars react with proteins to hasten the aging process. And you'll see here that the higher the levels, the concentrations in a solution of glucose, the higher the levels of rancid fats in the tissues. Look at that. In fact, if you were to look at Equitable life insurance statistics, they will tell you 29-year-old diabetics live 16 years left than non-diabetics. 49-year-old diabetics live 10 years left. I mean, look at the influence of high blood sugar levels. I mean, they are shaving decades off your life. Now, I'll ask you a question. How many years do a pack a day of Marlboros shave off your life? 7.5 years. High sugar levels are at least twice as damaging as smoking a pack a day. We call ourselves healthy. I call myself healthy as I open that 3-pack of Newman's Own peanut butter cups. As I take just one last square of the Crispy Rice Newman's Own chocolate bar. But the bottom line is sugar is killing us. And I know some church functions where they liberally hand out chocolate chip cookies loaded with sugar, but they would never dream of having an ashtray or a pack or cigarette girl dishing out packs of Marlboros. Let's look at the incidence of diabetes. 4.9% of the population in 1990, 8% today, 7.9% in 2001. 8% of you in this room have diabetes. But there's even some more interesting data. And this was a study where it was unintended. They didn't expect to find it. That 3.2% of people in the population don't even know they have diabetes. 4.9% don't even know they have diabetes if you look at oral glucose tolerance tests. So there's two kinds of tests you can do. You can do it by WHO or you can do it by the American Diabetic Association. One is a fasting glucose measurement, where if you walk in, they take your blood sugar and it's above 125 milligrams per deciliter of blood, you have diabetes. But that they've been finding is not accurate. The true measure of if you are a diabetic or not is if you do an oral glucose tolerance test where they will feed you 50 grams of glucose, 75 grams of glucose, and then measure your blood sugar over a period of 1 hour, 2 hours, and then your blood sugar at any point goes above 200 milligrams per deciliter of blood. That is the WHO criteria, the World Health Organization criteria for diabetics. And I'll tell you, I was shocked at people in the office that had no idea they were diabetic. And I sure wasn't going to test my own blood, I'll tell you. Do you look at this? Blood sugar really acts like a free radical. It reacts with oxygen, it reacts with proteins, it reacts with fats. It is a free radical. The Framingham Offspring Study, they followed over 3,000 people for over 4 years. They were all free of diabetes. They all had normal glycated hemoglobin levels, HbA1c, 5.33 normal levels. And that is long-term. Glycated hemoglobin measures the long-term blood sugar levels in your body, the hemoglobin that is linked to glucose. There's a certain percentage that always is linked to glucose. And they looked at how high fasting blood sugar could raise heart disease risk or cardiovascular disease risk. High fasting blood sugar resulted in almost a tripling of your risk for cardiovascular disease. But when you did it according to an oral glucose tolerance test, it was 3.2 times, even higher, over triple. Here are some of the biomechanical mechanisms by which glucose reacts with proteins. And I'm not going to get into a lot of this. This will put you to sleep even more than I probably already have. But basically, it's involving shift bases, amidori products, where as glucose reacts with proteins, it becomes irreversible. The body, usually it's a two-way reaction. And you can see here where the shift base is a two-way, where it goes back, where the body can break it down, but eventually it cannot break it down. And when you get to amidori products, you start getting build it up, and you get something called lipofuscin. and lipofuscin builds up. That is basically a marker for it's an age pigment. It's basically a final reaction product where the body cannot get rid of it, the body cannot dispose of it. It is basically a buildup of glucose-reacted proteins that build up over the years. And you can see here, the longer you live, the more you have of your intracellular space filled with liposuspin. I mean, to the point is, you get to be 70 or 80, 55%. Or you could have the same level of liposuspin if, say, for example, you're a chronic peanut butter cup user. So let's go. I'm going to flip through some of these. Lipofuscin. Let's look at a normal carotid artery. That's the artery in your neck. This is a carotid artery from a normal, non-diabetic 45-year-old. Healthy, Seventh-day Adventist dietary carotid artery. Let's look at one from a diabetic 49 years old. Look at how glycation and blood sugar are literally reacting away and inflaming away that artery. The epithelial cells that line that artery. Fatty streaks. There may even be a couple of traces I detect here of a peanut butter cup. I don't know. So with a recent study, New England Journal of Medicine, in the Diabetes Prevention Program Research Group, this is a large study conducted by Macular, and this was done at the George Washington University in Maryland, by the way. And they followed diabetics over a period of years, 2 years. And they decided what works better, drugs for diabetes, control, or diet? Well, you can see here the metformin reduced the incidence of diabetes by about 31%. What they were reluctant to share with people was that in the very same study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that diet, low glycemic foods, and lifestyle, a little bit of exercise, outperformed metformin by almost 100%. It was doubly effective. Just diet and lifestyle. Do we really need drugs? So in the New England Journal of Medicine, David Ludwig, an MD PhD, working in the Children's Hospital in Boston, is linking low glycemic foods with obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Preventing, I should say. Basically, what we're saying is low glycemic foods, the habitual consumption of high glycemic foods, conversely, may increase the risk for obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, a hypothesis that derives considerable support from laboratory studies, clinical trials, and epidemiological analysis. Clinical use of the glycemic index as a qualitative guide to food selection would seem to be prudent in view of the preponderance of the evidence suggesting benefit and absence of adverse effects. No bad side effects on this one, guys. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, recent. So if you look at glycemic, we know that consuming a diet of low glycemic foods can be very valuable in preventing aging and slowing the onset of diabetes and not making you a risk casualty for equitable life insurance. Some of the high glycemic foods you'll see here, bread, sugar. I mean, white sugar, 68. And that's cane goodness. That's cane sugar. Domino brand. Grape nut cereal. People say, oh, grape nuts, wonderful. Look at all that wonderful fiber. Look at all those B vitamins. Well, it's got a glycemic index right under that, 67. Moderate glycemic foods include oatmeal, brown rice, whole grain, pinto beans, and wheat. Low glycemic foods include yogurt, navy beans, skim milk, lentils, barley. So we were very curious. What is the glycemic index of the dried Ningxia Wolfberry? Are you curious about that? Gary was also very curious about that. I was very curious about that. So we undertook a study using the David Jenkins protocol. He was a University of Ontario nutritionist, biochemist, that in 1981 created the first international tables for glycemic index. He created those. So he did a protocol in which he actually analyzed glycemia. We followed that protocol. 10 males, 10 females. He said you'd only need to do between 5 and 10. We actually wanted to increase our sample size. So in every case, we did more than 10. Over 20 people, because the larger your sample size, the better your statistics. And we did it primarily with people in the office. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to see who was diabetic or not. So this involves giving people 50 grams of a food, 12 hours through a 12-hour fast. So we will ask people to fast, come in the next morning, and they will consume either glucose tablets or a test food like Ningxia Wolfberry or Ningxia Red or the Wolfberry Crisp bars. And we will determine through an area under the curve where we actually measure the area under the curve, which is what Jenkins did, of the glycemic response over a period of 2 hours. So I'm going up to their desk every 15 minutes, we're pricking blood. We have to get an area under the curve. So this was a fairly rigorously designed and rigorously executed study. We wanted to make sure it was equivalent to any of the data out there for glycemic index. So you can see here, the dried Ningxia Wolfberry has a glycemic index of 28.8 or 29. How does that compare with the low glycemic foods? It makes it one of the lowest glycemic foods known. Why is that? How can a berry that according to the nutritional label is 42% sugar and be a dried fruit? And they say, oh gosh, dried fruits, loaded with sugar. Why does it have a glycemic? I was surprised. I was not expecting this to be as low as it was. I just let the data tell the story. And there were some cases I had to scratch data because I looked at the numbers and I said, we need to redo this. I wanted this to be very rigorous, very fair. One of the reasons I believe for the low glycemic index is probably it's one of the highest foods in chromium known, higher than beef, cheese, liver, whole wheat bread, rye bread. Loads of chromium, and chromium is crucial in something called the glucose tolerance factor. It is part of the glucose tolerance factor that gets glucose into the cell, glucose tolerance factor. This was a study in which they actually fed wolfberry extracts, and measured their effect on rabbits, diabetic rabbits, watched their ability to lower blood sugar levels on their own. And you can see here, there's a control group there. The red group is after treatment with Ningxia Wolfberry, and the top group is before treatment, diabetic rabbits. So we know that they have an anti-diabetic effect. What is the glycemic index of Ningxia Red? You curious? I hear it all the time. Gosh, is not Ningxia Red suitable for diabetics? Glycemic index of 10.57. I would say yes. This was done using a 50-gram sample. All these tests were done 50 grams. So 50 grams of Ningxia Red has a glycemic index of about 11. 50 grams of dried wolfberry has a glycemic index of about 29. They rank them among the lowest glycemic. This is the first time this has been recorded. This is included in the new Dr. Young's new Wolfberry book. Here's one diabetic. If I were to call them a diabetic, they would be very angry at me. But according to WHO standards, they're a diabetic. You can see here the red underneath there is 50 grams of Ningxia Wolfberry, and the blue is 50 grams of glucose tablets. You can see the difference. Compare the food versus the glucose. Here's another diabetic, same thing. Here's another diabetic, same thing. So these are not affecting blood sugar levels in diabetics. Now we looked at glycemic responses of different beverages, Via Viente and G3 in this case. We were very curious to see what their glycemic impact would be. And you can see here the purple one is Via Viente. Look at that spike. Look how enduring it is. Look at the G3, the green one, and then look at the Ningxia Red below it. Very gradual and delicate rise in blood sugar. Let's look at the crisp bar. Glycemic index of 14. Same thing in the diabetics. You can see here in first diabetic, minimal impacts. Second, third. All of this information has been printed for the first time in Dr. Young's new book. And it is really, this book is due really to Gary's persistence and Gary's vision with the Wolfberry. That is why this book is here. If it were not for Gary's vision, this book and this data would not exist. Thank you very much.